I've been needing to rebuild this display shelf for a while now, so I figured, well, might as well turn on the camera, show you guys what I'm doing. So I drew up a quick blueprint, all based off this $4 poster frame over here that I found at Walmart. Later on, you'll see why I'm using this, but in the meantime, we need to start milling up our lumber. First things first, I need to chew up these edges. This lumber came from a big box store, so the edges, they're hardly ever square. They're full of cracks and splinters. This time around, I want the shelf to be a little bit wider than the last one, so I'm using some 1 by 12 stock. And yes, I know, this blade is dull. It's the same blade I've been using to cut about 1,600 square feet of engineered hardwood for doing the floors in my house. So with a nice square edge, we can move on to making our first cuts. I'm going to mark these at 34 inches, use my speed square to make that line a little bit longer and more visible. And I'm going to scoot it on down, line it up, and make our second cuts. I should also mention I'm using some double-sided tape to hold two pieces of wood together here. That way I can get two planks the exact same length with just one cut. I'm going to do a little sanity check here to make sure. Yep, 34. And let's see, 34 inches. Next cut needs to be 22 and a quarter inches. So just like last time, I'm going to make a little bitty mark. Use my speed square to make it bigger. Scoot it on down. And you guys guessed it, we're going to cut it. I'm going to do one last sanity checker. It's kind of hard to tell the angle, but these are right at 22 and a quarter. Now to complete the box, we're going to do some fancy jointery here. This is known as a rabbet cut. The stock we're using is 3/4 of an inch thick. According to Google, 5/16 is approximately half a 3/4. So on the table saw here, I'm going to raise the blade to 5/16 of an inch. And since it is 3/4 wide, I'm going to set the fence, the backstop there, I'm going to set that to 3/4 of an inch. This will all make sense in a little bit. Now with the first groove cut, I'm just going to flip the board 180 degrees. I'm going to make the exact same cut on the opposite edge. Now for the next operation, we're basically just going to flip those measurements. First cut was 3/4 long and 5/16 high. This time we're going to do 5/16 long and 3/4 of an inch high. Now I do not trust my math, so I made myself these little test pieces here to double check all my measurements. They're actually making a very handy setup block. Now with the blade and the fence where it needs to be, we're going to make a super sketchy cut on this table saw. And believe it or not, this is sped up a little bit. I'm just going extremely slow and being extra careful. Now with that little bitty piece cut out, we're going to be left with a slot that is the exact same size as our side pieces. Do those setups and measurements make sense now? I just got done finishing the other cut on the opposite piece when I was reminded that it's nighttime outside. I probably shouldn't be using some noisy saws right now. So I used this time just to mock everything up loosely with some masking tape just to see where I was looking here. Now for the internal shells, I'm going to make some dado cuts. Now just like last time, I'm going to make a groove that is approximately half the thickness of our material. And I'm going to scoot it over 3/4 of an inch and make another groove. This is going to leave us with two grooves. The outside edges will be the exact same thickness as our material. You guys remember that word earlier, dado? Now we're actually going to make that cut. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start hogging out that material in the center of our cuts there, one blade's width at a time. Now that's going to leave us a slot for our shelves to slide in and out of. Now the problem with the big box lumber, it is not a uniform thickness, so it's tight in some areas, it's got some gaps, it's just, I don't know. It'll work though. Now that you guys kind of know what we're going for here, we're just going to start making these dado cuts at a much larger scale on our side pieces. So just like last time, I'm going to make a cut, I'm going to flip the board 180 degrees, make another cut, adjust my fence, make one more cut. And with the last cut there, I'm going to flip the board 180 degrees, make a cut on the opposite edge, and we're going to have a groove that is exactly 3/4 of an inch wide. Now, as you guys saw in the thumbnail, this thing has two shelves, which means I got to do this cut a total of 8 times. That is 4 for each board. Now, with the last dimensional cut done, I'm just going to scoot that fence in 1/16 of an inch. And I'm going to start hogging out all that material in the center. And yes, guys, I do know they make dado stacks made specifically for these types of cuts. To me, it is not worth the money since this whole operation took all of 5 minutes. Now, with the last cut done, you could see that we are left with a groove. Problem being, the blade I'm using is a finish cut blade, so it's got a V-shaped groove in the very center of it to help clear out material as you cut. That leaves kind of this wavy, ribbed, grooved pattern. We got two things we could do. Well, three technically, but I don't want to buy a different blade. I'm gonna secure our stock here to the top of my table saw, and I'm just gonna clean up these grooves with the chisel. The second method would be just to go in there with some sandpaper and kill yourself trying to make all that smooth. So if you're any good with a chisel, after a few minutes, you should have a nice smooth groove all the way down. Now, with all that done, we're ready for our first glue up. Now, don't laugh at me, but I left this stuff in the garage, it froze, and it got really, really thick. Now, it still works, I just got to get a little creative with the application. So I'm going to throw a clamp onto this thing here loosely just to kind of hold it in place while I get everything exactly where it needs to be and make sure that it is 90 degrees. So when I got it exactly where I want it to be, I'm just going to throw some more clamps on it and I'm going to clean up all the glue that's squeezed out. Now, I don't know about you guys, but watching glue dry is almost as fun as watching paint dry. So I'm just going to tack this thing in place with a brad nailer, then off camera install the other piece just like we did here. Now moving on to the top piece, we're just going to do the exact same thing, only upside down. So we're going to wrestle with it for a few minutes, get it exactly where we want it to go, then hold it all in place with some clamps, and again, just drive it all home with some brad nails. Now this lumber from the big box store, it's not exactly high grade material. This upper piece here, it had a little bit of warpage in it, so I'm just going to do a whole bunch of extra brad nails on it just to make sure it stays in place. Now while the glue is still somewhat wet, I'm going to do a little sanity check here, make sure everything is at 90 degrees. If I need to make any adjustments, now is the time. And no, this actually looks pretty good. Now with the glue dry, I'm going to measure the inside of these dado slots here just so I know how wide we need to cut the shelves. And you know it's square because they are both 33 and an eighth inches. So just like last time, we're going to true up the edges, make our measurements, scoot it down, align it, and cut it. I also lost my double-sided tape, so I just kind of got these jankily taped together with some masking tape. With them cut, I'm going to do a quick measurement just to make sure they're right. It looks like 33 and an eighth. Now let's rip this tape off and see what the bottom piece looks like. It looks like 33 and an eighth. So I'm going to put a little bitty dab of glue at the top of each slot. So as we drive our board into place, it'll smear that glue down along with it. Now, it's as tight as these are, we probably could have got away without using any kind of glue here. Yeah, look at that. I am one of those long-haired freaky people they wrote that song about. And I got mad because my push block kept breaking, so I grabbed an offcut from that engineered hardwood for the floors. You know, the piece that's dulled up all of my saw blades because it's so hard and tough. Yeah, it didn't last that long either. But yeah, I probably could have done it with that glue. Just left that a nice friction fit. I did, however, learn my lesson. On the bottom shelf, I kind of beveled the back of the edges a little bit just so they slide in easier. Some of you guys may have noticed I got baking soda in the background here. Let me show you what this is for. See this knot here that fell out? I had this same thing happen on another facing board down here. Let me show you how I fix this. If I was not going to paint this, I would make a plug, the same species of wood, then glue it down in place and sand it flush. Instead, I'm just going to make a flow dam here with some masking tape. Now burnish it real good. See my thumb turning purple? So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to prime the hole with a little bit of super glue. And I'm going to sprinkle some baking soda down in there. Then from there, I'm just going to build it up in multiple layers of super glue and baking soda. And you guys have to go in layers. If you just fill it full of baking soda and then add your super glue, it's only going to harden just the top layer. So keep building up the layers until you're just higher than the wood. That way you'll have something to sand back to. Now, do not be alarmed if you got to go back and do some touch ups. It's not at all uncommon for some uncured baking soda to be in there. So just take your time here. A whole lot of filling, sanding, filling, sanding. Eventually, you'll get something that is super smooth and flat. Now, if you guys did not build this up in layers, when you peel this piece of tape off, all that uncured baking soda is just going to come pouring out, and you're going to have a void that you're going to have to refill again. Now, as I was handling the wood here, I noticed one of the knot holes up top was loose, and I don't want to have to go through this whole process again, so I'm going to stabilize this knot. Stabilizing means they lock the piece in place with either epoxy or resin, or in my case, I'm just going to use some super glue because it works just as well. Now that we got all of our knot holes filled and stabilized, we can move on to sanding. Now this process took me maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, but I cut 99% of it out so you guys wouldn't be bored with that monotonous, repetitive nonsense. Sanding sucks. Now that nightmare out of the way, we can move on to giving this thing a good wipe down. Just a damp cloth will pick up any leftover sanding dust, contaminants, just anything that's on the surface that shouldn't be there, that will get in our paint. And speaking of paint, we're gonna have a change of plans here. The paint I was gonna use ended up freezing and now it's worthless. So we're gonna skip that step and move on to this poster frame. So while I'm getting this thing unboxed, I'm gonna tell you why I'm using this. It has a clear Lexan cover on it. If one were to go out and buy a sheet of acrylic or polycarbonate, just something this size, it would cost about $60. This little piece right here cost me $4 whole. So since I don't want to run into town to buy some paint just for this project, I'm going to use the back of that poster frame temporarily here just to kind of act as our backdrop. Since this is temporary, I'm just going to put a few little staples in it just to hold it in place and not have a big headache when I go to try to take it off later. Now the front cover, it will be a permanent piece, so take your time here, get it lined up and square with all the edges. And once you're happy with where it's setting, we're just going to use some tape here to hold it in place for the next step. I probably should have rotated this piece here so you could see what I was doing, but I wasn't thinking. But what I'm doing here is I'm just drilling some locating holes for a pin directly through the clear front cover and down into the wood. Now on the first shelf I built the same way, I had used a finish nail to actually hold this in place, and it was just a pain every time I wanted to add a model to it or take it out. So this time around, I'm going to take an 18 gauge brad nail that I had cut in half, and these are just going to act as a peg of sorts just to hold that front cover on. So put it down in that hole we drilled earlier, give it a few little taps with a hammer to drive it down a little further and set it in place. Now as it sets, the front cover could just easily slide off. So I'm going to bend that pin up a little bit just to have some kind of obstacle it has to overcome before it slides off. And here it is. For about $28 worth of product, you guys could build one of these too. So I got it set up downstairs where I'm going to have it. I like it because I could get 2 rows of models in there and I still got room for more. The last display I had, I can only fit 9 models into it. And since it's extra wide, I could also use the top of it for some storage. So I'm going to throw that clear cover back on it, and I'm going to call this video done. So if you guys enjoyed watching me pretend to be a woodworker and act like I know what I'm doing, let me know. In the meantime, though, thank you guys so much for watching, if you actually watched this.